What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? How did the Dbacks become the highest scoring team in the majors? And is Torey Lovullo being overlooked in the National League Manager of the Year race?
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and a graphic designer, so please go check out my website, MillardThomas24downmyportfolio.com. On there, you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. On today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, we'll talk about how the D-backs offense became the most prolific offense in baseball, how Corbin Carroll turned around his season, and is Torey Lovullo being overlooked in the Manager of the Year race. Thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms. So please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. All right. Now let's get into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. And let's talk about this D-backs offense and how we got here, because if you look right now, this is the best offense in the majors, and it's crazy to think about because of where the D-backs started the first half of the season, the up and down nature of this offense. There was some big offensive outputs, but game to game, this offense wasn't exactly consistent. But that has really changed over the last couple months. And now the D-backs, number one in runs scored, number one in runs per game, and they are up like 30 runs on the second place team. I think they're up 32 runs on the Yankees, who are second most runs in the majors. And so this has turned into a historic offensive season by the D-backs. And I want to talk about how exactly we got here, because right now the D-backs are averaging, let me get the exact number. The D-backs are averaging 5.35 runs per game. That is second in their franchise history. The only D-back squad to average more runs per game than this team this year was the 1999 D-backs at 5.6 runs per game. And a lot of these stats were courtesy of Alex Weiner in his Arizona Sports article today, detailing some of this stuff. Real big inspiration for this segment. D-backs offense, historical this season, second best in terms of runs per game in their franchise history. And what makes it so interesting, what the D-backs have done this year, is because when you compare the D-backs offense to the rest of the majors this season, the offense this season is kind of down across Major League Baseball. In 1999, that D-backs franchise record holder for runs per game, the average Major League team in 1999 was putting up 5.1 runs per game. So the D-backs in 1999 averaging 5.6 runs to the league average of 5.1 runs. The D-backs this season are averaging 5.4 runs, but the league average is only 4.4 runs. So relative to the league, this season is way more prolific offensively than those 1999 D-backs, because they were only a half point better than the rest of Major League Baseball. Meanwhile, this year's D-backs is a whole run better than the average of Major League Baseball this season. And it's been really incredible to see how the D-backs got to the point this year, because basically they took everything that worked for them last year, right? You took the small ball, you took the patience, you took the speed, you took the ability to come back late in games. You brought that to 2024, and then you added some new wrinkles to your game. You added some power, you added some timely hitting, and now you added some depth into the mix as well. Last year's D-backs team, They were second in steals, first in sacrifice hits, second most productive outs, second lowest strikeout rate, third most comeback wins in Major League Baseball. With the Corbin Carroll speed and the Thomas and the McCarthy and the Perdomos, like you had your speed, you had your small ball, you had guys like Christian Walker and Ketel Marte still being the thumpers in your lineup with the Carrolls and the Lords Gurriels. Like you just had a nice, well balanced offense last year. It was a formula that, of course, led to a lot of D-back success, right? Enough success where the D-backs were able to score enough runs to make it to the World Series. And we saw their offense be prolific enough last season to take out some teams like the LA Dodgers, who were, had a star powered lineup, and the Philadelphia Phillies, who were a star powered lineup as well. Now, the offense did fall off a little bit against the Texas Rangers, and that's why we saw the D-backs lost that World Series. But their formula definitely worked for most of the playoffs, and it was an offense that was more it was more like death by a thousand cuts than one of those offenses like the Yankees of the 2010s that try to bludgeon you with big swings. It was more like, let's nickel and dime you. Let's get some singles, some doubles. Let's steal some, steal some bases. Let's get some bunts, and let's try to play some small ball and create some chaos offensively. And the formula was perfect for the talent that the D-backs had last year, but we knew it wasn't the best offense. It wasn't the best offense in Major League Baseball last year. They still finished the year last season below average in average runs, OPS, OPS plus, home runs. Like they did some really incredible stuff last year in terms of patience, in terms of small ball, in terms of speed, comeback wins, all that. But overall, the offense was still average at best. And so they went to the offseason and they definitely improved, right? They brought back the core that led them to the World Series last year, but then we saw them in the offseason go out there and improve their DH position by adding Jock Peterson and Randall Grichuk. They improved third base by adding Eugenio Suarez, and we got a new and improved Jake McCarthy. We added Josh Bell at the deadline. Adrian Del Castillo has been superb since being called up from AAA. And now we're seeing this offense go to a new level, a way better level than what it was last season. And the offense was good enough to get to the World Series last year. This offense this year is crushing the one that we saw last season. D-backs currently fourth most home runs in the National League this year. They were below league average last season in that metric. Last season, the D-backs had 4 dudes with 20 home runs. They've already matched that total this season. And 2 of the guys last year was Corbin Carroll and Lourdes Gurriel. Those guys are around like 15 home runs right now. So it's very possible the D-backs could get to 6 20 home run guys this year. D-backs also first in average and OPS with runners in score position in the National League right now. Last season, the D-backs were actually not that great with runners in scoring position. Another stat where they were below league average. Average in OPS, scoring position, not that good last season. This year, they are both first in average and OPS with runners in scoring position in the National League. Meanwhile, they're still first in pinch hits, home runs, sacrifice hits. Like they've taken all their strengths from last year, but then they also improved on their weaknesses as well. Since July 1st, the D-backs are leading the league with 6.5 runs per game, 6.5 runs per game since July 1st. And we could see that number go up with some reinforcements coming back very soon in the Martes, the Walkers, the Morenos. Those guys are around the corner. So we could see this offense go to an even higher level, which is crazy to think about. This is a historic season by the D-backs from an offensive perspective. I'm glad to witness it, and this is the best offense in Major League Baseball. And it's crazy to say that as a D-backs fan because they never finished the season with the best offense in Major League history. So the fact that the D-backs are going to do it this year, a year coming off the World Series, very special stuff that we're witnessing from the squad in 2024. And one of the reasons for the D-backs offense being so good this year is the Corbin Carroll turnaround, which we'll talk about in segment number 2. But hey, if you're looking for any supplies, then I suggest getting supplies from the site that's made for the skilled trades, supplyhouse.com. Supplyhouse.com is a reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy to use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Get expert support and industry leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining supplyhouse.com's free Trademaster program. Every Trademaster gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at supplyhouse.com/TM and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at supplyhouse.com. All right. Let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast and let's talk about Corbin Carroll's turnaround to his season because there was a really good article by Brian Murphy on MLB.com that really laid it out because Carroll, we know he is still having a down season by his standards that he set last year. Even the small sample size that we saw in 2022 from Corbin Carroll was probably better than the full season that we've seen from Carroll this season. But over his last 7.5 weeks, Corbin Carroll has really turned it on. And this article really details about how you could trace the turnaround from Corbin Carroll back to July 7th. That is where everything flipped for Carroll this season. It can all get traced back to a July 7th game because prior to that game, in his first 87 games of the season, Carroll was, of course, struggling. I mean, you could look at the numbers right now for Carroll. It's still not like they're fantastic. His slash line currently is still 222 with a 707 OPS. Got 14 home runs, 12 triples, 21 stolen bases, but those numbers are actually like way improved compared to where they used to be. And I'm actually kind of impressed. Like the OPS is even that high from where it once was because in his first 87 games prior to July 7th, Corbin Carroll had a 210 average, a 608 OPS, and only 2 home runs in those 87 games. He was really doing nothing offensively. Whenever he got on base, he could still steal. But even at one point, we were looking at his sprint speed numbers, and we are like, man, even the speed isn't there for Carroll. I think we've seen the speed go up a lot over the last few months, but overall, that offensive package, those first 90 games of the season, specifically the first 87 games, he just did nothing for the D-backs those first 87 games offensively. And we talked about Eugenio Suarez a lot during that stretch because we know during the same time frame he was awful. We all wanted him traded or released or anything, right? Just get Eugenio Suarez out of here. Thankfully, he's turned around his season. But Carroll, at the same time, when he was going through that rough stretch, that rough patch, we are also having discussions of should Carroll be optioned to AAA to figure out his swing a little bit, right? Does he need just a couple weeks in Reno where it's a hitter friendly ballpark to establish some confidence? And thankfully, him and Eugenio Suarez have had their turnaround at the exact same time because Carroll now, you look at his numbers since we were having those discussions, since July 7th in his last 39 games, or it might be 40 games now after yesterday, but regardless, a 594 slugging, 12 home runs, 40 runs scored, a 10.6 walk percentage. Like he has been phenomenal during that time. And the D-backs record during that stretch, 31-11, while Carroll has torn the cover off the ball, home runs, triples, scoring a ton of runs. He's been doing everything. The D-backs have climbed up a ton in the NL West during that time, like by 7.5 games approximately. Like the division has gotten so much closer as Carroll has turned it on, and we can see how it has influenced the record of the D-backs as well. It's no surprise with the D-backs most dynamic player is playing good baseball, the D-backs team is also playing good baseball. And so what happened to Corbin Carroll that has led to this dramatic turnaround in this season where he was one of the 5 to 7 worst players, because as I was saying before, when Eugenio Suarez was going through that struggle, by WRC plus, Eugenio Suarez is like bottom 3 in like Major League Baseball. But a guy not far behind him during that time was Corbin Carroll, who was like bottom 7 WRC plus those first 87 games. And so, what has happened to Corbin Carroll the last 40 games that have turned around his season? Really, it's been three things that have fixed his swing and his approach this second half of 2024. It's been him shrinking the zone, crushing elevated heat, and not smashing the ball into the ground. Corbin Carroll has seen a slight tick up in his strikeout rate over the last few weeks, but it's been intentional. It's because Corbin Carroll is now shrinking his strike zone and waiting for his go-to pitch. Before he did that, he expanded his strike zone. He'd try and cover more of the plate, try to hit, more of those pitches on, that are borderline. But nowadays, he doesn't really care about that. He doesn't mind taking a borderline strike or even striking out if it means he gets to wait for a pitch that's more in the zone that he likes to crush. And that's what he's been doing. And that's what he's been doing such a good job of recently, shrinking that zone and just waiting for his perfect pitch, waiting for a pitch that he knows he can do damage with. Because before, he would just swing at a lot more pitches that just weren't going to turn into quality contact, was not going to really result in anything. And now he's waiting for his pitch. And because of that, a pitch that he was struggling with earlier in the season, the elevated pitch or the elevated fastball that was getting to Carroll earlier in the year. You could really get to him with something hard or something high in the zone. But now, over the last few weeks, you can't really do that as he's starting to shrink his strike zone. Now, if it's something elevated, he likes that pitch, especially if it's elevated and thrown hard. The harder it's thrown, the more damage Corbin Carroll is going to do. So, all of this has really helped him, the shrinking of the zone, waiting for something a little bit more elevated, maybe elevated with some heat so he can turn on it. Corbin Carroll likes those things right now when it comes to his approach. And because of all this, we've seen him elevate the ball a lot more, which was his biggest issue those first 87 games, right? How many times did he swing and the ball was crushed, but it was a hard ground ball to second base, hard ground ball to shortstop? We have seen an uptick in his fly ball rate the last few weeks with his hard contact rate going up because he's waiting for his pitch. Now we're seeing the home runs. Now we're seeing the triples. When you wait for your pitch, and when it's a high elevated pitch that you can crush, you're going to see a lot more fly balls, and those fly balls are going to turn into home runs and triples when it's Corbin Carroll at the plate. And so the fact that he's fixed his approach, fixed his swing this late in the season has really helped him out so much. And now he's on this pace where he could end the year and still put up some pretty solid numbers. Like, my dream is for Corbin Carroll to end the year. We look up at the stats and we say, wait, Corbin Carroll had a down year, but he still had 20 plus home runs, 30 plus stolen bases, most runs in the NL, and the most triples. Like, he can still finish the year with fine offensive stats. And the defense has also been pretty good for Corbin Carroll in right field. Yes, he hasn't exactly grown on the NL Rookie of the Year award, where maybe it was going to come into this season and potentially win the MVP, especially when you see Ronald Acuna go down so early. Maybe you think Corbin Carroll all of a sudden has a chance to win the MVP award. That hasn't exactly happened, but in the second half of the season, his last 4 games, Corbin Carroll once again has started to look like an MVP. And if he can continue this rate for the rest of the season, watch out for this Dbacks offense, which sounds crazy to say because they're already the best offense in baseball. But if you get this Corbin Carroll for the rest of the season with the reinforcements that are starting to come back, yes, this offense has a chance to be even more scary. And one thing that's scary is Torey Lovullo not winning the NL Manager of the Year award, which we'll discuss in segment number 3. Well, if you want to bet on Torey Lovullo winning NL Manager of the Year, then of course the best place to do that is going to be FanDuel Sportsbook, because you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. My favorite thing to do on FanDuel is, of course, the same game parlay. Give me Zach Gallen over on strikeouts. Give me Jake McCarthy over on RBIs, and give me the D-backs money line. When that 3-leg hits, it brings a big smile to my face. And if you want a big smile on your face, just visit fanduel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. All right. Let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. And let's talk about, is Torey Lovullo being overlooked in the NL Manager of the Year race? Because, guys, if you've listened to my podcast, you know I like Torey Lovullo, but I don't love Torey Lovullo. I'm not the biggest Lovullo guy. I like him from a personality standpoint, like him from an emotional leader standpoint, the way he galvanized the crew last year in the postseason, his tears that he shed after he lost the World Series. Like, no one I think I would want to go into battle more for from an inspiring standpoint than a Torey Lovullo. I think he would galvanize my warrior spirit more than maybe any other manager in baseball. But when I look at the day-to-day executions of Torey Lovullo with how he's done his lineup at times, where the weird places I've seen him put Jake McCarthy and Eugenio and Corbin Carroll, and the way he jumbles it up, the way he uses his bullpen at time, where it's like, we know who the 7, 8, and 9 should be. Why don't you know Torey Lovullo? Why does it take so long to go to Justin Martinez as a closer? I love Torey Lovullo from the emotional leader standpoint, but from the X's and O's day-to-day execution, I do have my questions and concerns where it comes to Torey Lovullo. But even with all that being said, I think Manager of the Year, the award, is more about narratives. It's more about because a manager is so hard to quantify, right? There's not really stats outside of record that you can go off of. And so I think a lot of it is building a case. It's kind of like being in a courtroom. I think for your manager, you really have to build a case, build a narrative. And I think Torey Lovullo has a top 2 narrative in the National League for this award. And I don't really see how you can justify putting so many other dudes above Torey Lovullo. I get it if you don't want to make him the favorite, but I think there's so many other managers that, when you look at the FanDuel odds, have a better chance of winning the award than Lovullo. And I think that's crazy because currently FanDuel is only showing 4 managers. Like, they think this is FanDuel thinks this award is down to 4 guys already, and Torey Lovullo is not one of them. And I just don't know how the D-backs could be the best team in baseball for a multi-month stretch. You take out the best teams in the sport, and the manager is not even considered for NL Manager of the Year. I think it's so weird that he's not getting the love. I don't know how there could be 4 managers ahead of Torey Lovullo right now. And it's so weird because the D-backs are coming off a season where they went to the World Series and everyone agreed after the offseason that they had that they improved, right? Everyone thinks that the World Series runner-up got better this past offseason. And so if you're a Torey Lovullo, you now have this expectation coming to the year where the team has to be good. You put resources and money and talent into this team. You're coming off the World Series. You now have an expectation to perform, right? The hunted, not the hunters. That's what you are if you're the D-backs. You got the Dodgers coming after you. You got the Phillies coming after you. Like, you're being chased now if you're the D-backs, and so you have the expectation of having to perform. But then there's this other camp where they think last year for the D-backs was a fluke. They don't believe the D-backs were as good as, the final record showed, that the fact that they got to the World Series was just kind of a one-year wonder, and they don't believe the D-backs were actually even deserving. So Torey Lovullo actually has to prove to those guys that the D-backs deserve to be there. And so he has to put a team that is just good from day one, and it's still out there beating other squads just to prove to those naysayers that you did deserve to be in the situation they ended up last year. And so Torey Lovullo is going out there and competing with these 2 conflicting ideals. Plus, his team is just never seemingly healthy. He never has a full squad, and so he's dealing with these ideals. He never has a full squad on the field, and no one wants to give him the love and the credit he deserves. I'm not even a Torey Lovullo guy, but I'm like, dang, he's being overlooked for this award. At times, the D-backs have missed Seawald, Monty, Erod, Gallen, Kelly, Alec Thomas, Perdomo, Ketel Marte, Christian Walker, Gabriel Moreno. All those guys missed time this year for the D-backs. And despite all this pressure from the outside forces and no consistency from who's playing, this is still a team by this time next week could be in first place in the National League, number one seed, and maybe number one in like every offensive stat. But no one is mentioning Lovullo as the manager of the year. I just think it's so strange. Right now on FanDuel, the favorite is the Milwaukee manager. I do think he has a case. I'm actually not going to argue that one too much because, again, I think it's about narratives and the talent on that Brewers team's not that great. They traded Corbin, haters the last couple years. Woodruff hasn't really pitched at all, right? I think this season they just lost Yelich. Freddie Peralta is now your number one. Like, I think he's fine if you want to make him the favorite. But outside of him, I don't know how anyone else could be deserving above Torey Lovullo. Number two is the Padres manager. How does he deserve to be second? Uh, I think he has the same case as Torey Lovullo. The Padres and D-backs kind of have the same issues in terms of health to their stars this year. They kind of have the same payroll in terms of the money spent. The talent on paper, I think, is pretty close as well. So if they're dealing with the same issues, why is one guy second and the other guy isn't even on the list? And then also think about how much money the Padres have spent on their star players the last couple of years, how many prospects they've given up. They have so many more resources committed to that team. They should be better than the D-backs, and they just aren't. The Phillies manager is third, and they have maybe the most talented team in the sport on paper. They have a top five payroll. Like, what is the adversity that Rob Thompson is facing? Let's not mention Torey Lovullo knocked his butt out in the postseason and then took 3 out of 4 from him not that long ago in a series. So I don't understand how he's ahead of Torey Lovullo. And then the Mets manager is fourth. That could be a sympathy vote because we didn't think the Mets were going to be good this season. And so maybe we think they're outperforming their expectations. But let's also not forget the Mets are the most expensive team in baseball. And so I think Lovullo is absolutely being disrespected in these FanDuel odds for NL Manager of the Year. And I'm just not going to stand for it. He is being overlooked, and Torey Lovullo should at least be a finalist at the end of the season for Manager of the Year. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.